Una conversación esencial para entender el momento por el que atraviesa el mundo, desde la guerra en Ucrania hasta el conflicto en Medio Oriente y la relación entre México y Estados Unidos, además de la frontera, migración y Venezuela. De todo esto platicamos con el hombre encargado de la agenda global en los Estados Unidos, el secretario del Departamento de Estado, Antony Blinken.
Do you think sanctions are an effective diplomatic tool? There's always been a debate about this, how much or how effective they are, and if that's the right pathway to a result.
Well, two things about this. Look, think about just Navalny for a second. It's pretty extraordinary that this one man, Putin felt compelled to persecute, to poison, and then to imprison. What does that tell you about Putin and about the system, that they're so afraid of what? One person. And then, horrifically now, we have his death. But in terms of the sanctions, I think what we've seen is this. It's dozens of countries that have imposed sanctions on Russia because of the aggression against Ukraine. And the impact is real, and it actually grows over time. Because, for example, when we're denying Russia some of the technology that it needs to modernize its defense industry, to modernize its aviation industry, to modernize its energy extraction industry, that's going to be felt more and more over time. Yes, they get some replacements from other places, but so much of what they actually need is being denied them. And then the pressure on the financial system, the pressure more broadly, means that they have to take measures that maybe in the near term have an effect in propping up their economy, but they can't sustain over time. So I think if we keep it up,
time, but
it takes time, but it has an effect, and it gets heavier and heavier over time. But keep in mind, no one wants to be doing this. It's not because anyone enjoys imposing sanctions on Russia or anyone else. It's because they're doing something that is profoundly challenging to our own interests, to our own values. And as we were talking about before, you have this aggression, and if it goes forward without anyone saying, no, you can't do that. You can't go into another country and try to take it over, try to erase it from the map, try and bring it, absorb it into your own country. You can't just change its borders by force. You can't dictate to its people what their future will be. If we don't stand up for those basic principles in one place, others will follow suit. And you can pick a list of would-be aggressors anywhere. That's why I think you've seen so many countries stand up. And what's interesting, too, is some of the countries that stood up originally in defense of Ukraine were not the United States or Europe. You have countries as far away as Japan and Korea, because they know what happens in one part of the world can also affect them in their part of the world.
Japan has made a significant investment.
So,
do you think that applies also in terms of sanctions to a country like Venezuela, for example, where the U.S. had made significant efforts to try to reinstall democracy in recent months?
Look, that's the path that we want to take. And again, sanctions in Venezuela, the sanctions are not an end in themselves. In fact, we've been very clear. We're fully prepared to lift them, and we've demonstrated that we've removed some if Venezuela gets on to a democratic path. And you now have an agreement that was reached between Maduro and the unitary platform, the opposition in Barbados, pathway to free and fair elections. If they continue to move down that pathway, then we're in a position where we can continue to remove sanctions. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the last few weeks suggests that Maduro is doing exactly the opposite, putting opposition leaders in prison, kicking out the United Nations,
refusing the protection flights from the U.S.
Exactly. So, look, our hope, our strongest desire is to see this move down a positive path, and then we can move down a positive path at the same time. But it requires Mr. Maduro to make decisions too.
Some European countries have expressed concern after former President Trump's comments on NATO membership and the impact this could have on their collective security. Do you think the future of NATO as we know it today, and more specifically the U.S. role as security guarantor in Europe and around the globe, depends on the outcome of the presidential election here in November?
Well, look, what I can tell you is this. We have a NATO alliance that's about to celebrate its 75th anniversary. And it's premised on one big idea, that all of the nations joining the alliance, and it's a defensive alliance, it's meant to protect all of our people. It's basically one for all. And so we've all committed that if anything happens to any of our countries, we'll all jump in and make sure that we're protecting that country. That's been a very powerful thing. And the alliance today is actually stronger and now larger than it's ever been. We have 2 new members. We have Finland and Sweden that's about to join. And that's because what we've seen, unfortunately, in the last last few years, is aggression coming from Russia, directed against Ukraine, also directed at other countries, that have caused countries to say, you know, it makes sense for us to be part of this alliance, so that if we see this aggression coming in our direction, we're all in this together. You know, the only time that the famous Article 5 of NATO, that's the part of the NATO treaty that says if one of us is attacked, we're all attacked and we'll join in defending each other. The only time that article was actually invoked in the entire history of NATO was after 9/11, when the United States was attacked. And all of our partners in NATO said, we're going to come to your defense and work with you if you want us to in dealing with those who attacked you on 9/11. So it's a long way of saying, I think Americans know and see that this alliance over so many years has not only been good for other countries that are in it, but it's been good for the United States. And I think that's why you're going to see an enduring commitment. The other thing is this. Back under President Obama, it was agreed that NATO countries would commit 2% of their economies to spending on defense. Now we're at a point with President Biden's leadership where about 2/3 of the alliance is reaching that mark. So these are countries that are standing up, making the contributions necessary, and that's good for the United States too.
And certainly Europe has been making more investments on defense. Now that we're talking about NATO membership, the war in Ukraine is entering its 2nd year, and just this week the head of NATO said that it's only a matter of time before Ukraine joins the alliance. I want to ask you if the administration has evolved on its thinking about fast-tracking Ukraine's NATO membership, and also what can we expect from that conflict with U.S. aid in doubt because of the process in Congress, and also European support proving insufficient?
Well, the truth is, first of all, when it comes to supporting Ukraine, what you've seen over the last 2 years since Russia attacked Ukraine in February of 2022 is now more than 50 countries coming together to support it, to help it defend itself, to make sure that it could repel the Russian aggression and stand strongly on its own 2 feet. And when it comes to what we call burden sharing, that is everyone carrying their weight in doing this, this is the best example of that I've ever seen in the more than 30 years that I've been doing this kind of work. Yes, the United States has provided a lot for Ukraine's defense, but Europe and our other partners have provided even more. We've provided about $75 billion or so. Our other partners, more than $100 billion. So this is equally shared, and here's the reason for it, and I think this is important. You know, when the Russians attacked Ukraine, of course, I think people felt on a human level and on a moral level, this is not right. We shouldn't let this pass. But there was also a recognition by countries around the world that if we let the Russians do this with impunity, without doing anything, then it might be Ukraine today, their country tomorrow, and not just in Europe, in many other places around the world. If you let a would-be aggressor see that aggression doesn't go unpunished, then you open a Pandora's box, and others may follow suit. So that's why so many countries have been so intent in defending Ukraine. It's both because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart and necessary thing to do to make sure that all of us are defended and we're deterring any would-be aggressors who might be out there lurking anywhere. So I think there's an enduring commitment, and it's not just from the United States, it's from dozens of countries around the world. And that commitment is to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs, militarily, economically, and also democratically, so that it builds a strong democracy. I think it's imperative that Congress provide the additional assistance that President Biden has requested. And by the way, think about this. Of the assistance that we're requesting for Ukraine, about $60 billion additional dollars, almost all of that will actually get spent in the United States to produce, to build the equipment that will then be sending to Ukraine. So that means investment in American industry. It means jobs in the United States. This is a win-win. It's a win for us, but it's also necessary to make sure we have a win for Ukraine.
Changing fronts, the Biden administration has provided unprecedented support to Israel in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, and it's been a crucial actor preventing further escalation in the region. Is that sustainable in the long term if Prime Minister Netanyahu maintains his offensive in Gaza?
Well, first, you're right. When we had the horrific attacks of October 7th, where we saw a terrorist group, Hamas, come into Israel and slaughter men, women, and children, executing children in front of their parents, executing parents in front of their children, burning people alive. Of course, we and so many others responded. And we stand strongly for the principle that Israel, like any other country, would have the right to defend itself and also to try to make sure that what happened on October 7th never happens again. But at the same time, we've said from the outset, and we've not only said, we've worked on this from the outset, it's so important how Israel does that, how it defends itself. And in particular, many innocent men, women, and children in Gaza have been caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making. You have an enemy in Hamas, a terrorist group, that hides behind civilians. It's operating from schools, from hospitals, from mosques, beneath them, a whole tunnel network. But none of that, nonetheless, takes away from Israel's obligation to do everything it possibly can to protect civilians and to make sure that assistance is getting to those who need it. So the United States has been pressing on that. President Biden's been pressing on that. But to your question, the most important thing when this conflict in Gaza comes to an end is to end this cycle of violence once and for all. Because what we really want to make sure is that this doesn't happen again for Israelis or for Palestinians. And I think there's a unique opportunity to do that. Arab countries want to see Israel integrated in the region in ways that they never did before. The Palestinian Authority that represents the Palestinian people is, I think, prepared to reform so it can be a more effective partner. But it also requires for all of these countries, if this is going to happen, that there be a clear pathway to a Palestinian state so that the rights of Palestinians can be fully realized and that they can have a state of their own, living side by side in peace and security with Israel. That vision is there, it's real, it's possible. The alternative is that we have more cycles of violence.
And you're talking about the possible end to the conflict. Just this week, President Biden suggested that a ceasefire and the release of hostages still under Hamas control could happen as soon as this weekend. Are there conditions for that?
So look, we've made real progress on getting an agreement to release the remaining hostages, and that would also produce an extended humanitarian ceasefire, which would be so much better for the people of Gaza. And I think, as the President said, we have made real progress on that. And he's been focused on this every single day. Now, whether we can get the agreement in the end ultimately depends on Hamas and whether it's willing to make the decisions necessary to conclude the agreement. It's so clear that that would be the right thing for the people of Gaza. Of course, it's the right thing for the hostages who never should have been taken from their families in the first place. So we'll see. But we're leaning into this. The President's leaning into this. He's pushing all of us to try to get this agreement over the finish line.
He also announced that he'll be visiting the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, on Thursday, after spending months negotiating a tough bipartisan bill in Congress that increased border security funds to a record level, but neglected to include any meaningful resources to fight the root causes of migration, something your State Department has talked a lot about, the importance of fighting the root causes of migration. Do you think that's the right strategy, focusing so much resources on the border and not as much on the root causes?
Look, I think we have to have a comprehensive approach. It's important to step back and put this in perspective. We are living around the world, not only in our own hemisphere, but around the world, with something that's truly historic, which is more migration than we've ever recorded in history. More people leaving their homes for one reason or another and going someplace else. And this is, as I said, reached record levels, and that's certainly true in our hemisphere as well. So we have to be conscious of that. And I think as we're looking at this challenge, we want to make sure of a few things, and we're focused on a few things. One is, yes, dealing, as you said, with the root causes, because people ultimately should have a right to remain in their own countries. But if conditions are such, if you're a parent and you can't put food on the table for your kid the next day, you'll do anything to figure out how to do that, even if that means taking an incredibly hazardous journey, putting yourself in the hands of traffickers, leaving your family, your friends, your language, your culture, and trying to go to another country, whether it's the United States, Mexico, or anywhere else. So one of the biggest drivers we know is a lack of basic economic opportunity in so many countries, so we have to try to build that up. Vice President Harris led an effort in the countries in North Central America, in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, to generate more private sector investment, and we got about almost $4.5 billion of additional resources invested. Now, it takes time for that investment to turn into job opportunities, but it's happening. We can see that. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're expanding legal pathways to come to the United States for people who do want to come here.
More
and
work
that's exactly
visas.
what we're doing. More work visas, family reunification, but also setting up offices in a number of countries throughout the hemisphere that people can go to instead of coming to the border, go to those offices in their own countries to determine whether they can legally come to the United States, whether they're eligible for one of these legal pathways. We're also helping many other countries in the hemisphere build up their own capacity to take people in on asylum or other kinds of pathways that would allow them to stay in those countries, but they need the resources to help support them. The United States is leading in that effort. And we're building cooperation with more countries than ever before in our hemisphere, again, for all of us together to tackle this challenge, because whether you're a country of origin, whether you're a country of transit, whether you're a country of destination, and sometimes you're more than one, we know that unless we're working together, we're not going to solve the problem. Look, ultimately, what we want, what President Biden wants, is for migration and for our border to be safe, to be orderly, and to be humane. So I think we need to see more resources across the board, both for the border itself, but also for countries in this hemisphere, so that they can also handle this problem with us and take some of the burden off us.
On that point, being more humane, do you think, you've been doing this, we were talking off camera for over 3 decades. Have you noticed a change in the way people welcome migrants or don't, asylum seekers? Are we becoming less welcoming of those people that are fleeing terrible conditions around the world? Are more conservative or extreme views on immigration becoming more mainstream?
Look, I think if you go back throughout our history, just speaking for the United States, we've seen successive waves of migration throughout our history. Every time there's been a wave of migration, of course, this raises concerns for people who are already there. It raises concerns about the changes that might take place in their own communities. And so we've seen that throughout our history. We know that when migration is done in a way that, again, is safe, is orderly, and is humane, it's added immeasurably to our country.
We're a product of that.
This is where and I think, most of us may be here, but maybe our parents weren't, or our grandparents weren't. But it has to be done in a way. I keep coming back to these words because they mean something. We want to make sure that people are safe, and we now have traffickers dominating the system and bringing people in the most unsafe ways possible. We want to be humane in treating people with dignity, with respect, but it has to be orderly. We're a nation of laws, and we have to make sure that we're applying the laws.
How do you plan to shield the U.S.-Mexico, the important U.S.-Mexico bilateral relation with all the political, electoral turbulence that we've been experiencing and that we can expect in the next few months?
As you mentioned a minute ago, I've been doing this for a while, for more than 30 years. I have to tell you, we have, in this moment in time, I think, the best relationship I've seen with Mexico, government to government. And that starts with President Biden, President López Obrador, both of whom are committed to the relationship. Now, at the same time, we probably have more challenges than we've ever had before, and that we have to face together. So this cooperation is absolutely critical, whether it's dealing with migration, whether it's dealing with gun trafficking that's going down and having a terrible effect in Mexico, whether it's dealing with drugs, including synthetic opioids like fentanyl coming into the United States. That cooperation is vital, and it really is deeper and stronger than it's ever been before, and I think that's going to be irrespective of anyone's elections. At the same time, there's huge opportunity. The border that we talk so often about is also a living border, which is allowing people in a legal way to go back and forth every day. Mexico is now our largest trading partner in the world.
Yeah.
That's
$175 billion last
It's having
year.
incredible benefits for people in the United States and in Mexico. We can also see a future where supply chains that used to be all the way on the other side of the world because anything that anyone buys in the United States probably has 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 things put into it somewhere else around the world. If you can bring those supply chains closer to home, right here in our own hemisphere, starting with Mexico, but also other countries in the hemisphere, it's going to be safer, it's going to be more efficient, it's going to be more resilient. We went through COVID, where these supply chains were disrupted in one way or another, and that made things harder to get. It made them more expensive. The more we're bringing this to our own hemisphere, the better off we're all going to be. And that's an incredible upside potential. We see that in our relationship with Mexico. I was just in Brazil and Argentina as well.
The G20.
And we can see that there too. You have, for example, in Argentina, a country that's one of the leading producers of something that goes into electric vehicle batteries, lithium. So we bring that to market in more effective ways. That can be part of the future in dealing with climate change, in building the energy economy for the 21st century.
We also spoke about security cooperation between Mexico and the U.S., and last week President López Obrador suggested that the U.S. might be interfering in Mexico's upcoming presidential election after a series of media reports that were based on leaks from U.S. federal agents suggesting that he was under investigation from the DEA as recently as 2018. Were you aware that President López Obrador was under investigation, and is the U.S. trying to interfere in the Mexican election as President López Obrador suggested?
Well, second question first. No, we're not interfering. We don't seek to interfere. We won't interfere. Second, when it comes to criminal investigations in our system, in our government, the Justice Department or relevant agencies do what they're going to do, and it's not something that's done with the State Department or with the White House or any other agency. We have a separation, and I really can't speak to any legal matters or any cases. What I can speak to is what I mentioned a moment ago, which is in terms of the relationship between the two presidents, President Biden and President López Obrador, in terms of the relationship between the two governments, Mexico and the United States. Never been stronger, never been more focused in working together to deal with all of these challenges. But maybe the most important thing of all, and it does come back in a sense to the border, is our two countries on a people-to-people level are arguably more connected than any other countries in the world. We are so intertwined in each other's lives in a positive way. That 2,000-mile border, but also so much that is happening between our countries, between our peoples. That's really the foundation of the relationship. And irrespective of who happens to be in office in any of our countries, that's what will really keep us together going forward.
We appreciate your time, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gracias.